When my mother-in-law whispered something in my husband's ear, I saw his expression change instantly, the fury clear in his eyes. Without warning, he grabbed my hair and slammed his fist into my face. The impact knocked me to the floor, leaving me dazed and terrified. Desperate, I dialed 911, hoping for help. But when the police arrived, my stomach dropped. One of the officers was a friend of my husband. His dismissive tone hit me like a slap as he coldly told me, "There's no proof." Helpless and alone, I realized I had no choice but to take matters into my own hands. I still remember the day I brought my daughter, Lily, home from the hospital. The overwhelming joy was tainted by exhaustion. I'm Isabella, 30 years old, struggling to adjust to the whirlwind of new motherhood. The early weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and trying to keep the house together in Austin, Texas. Our home was chaotic, laundry piles, dirty dishes in the kitchen, toys scattered across the living room. David, my husband, was working long hours, and I felt like I was sinking under the weight of it all. One particularly stressful afternoon, as I tried unsuccessfully to calm Lily's cries, the doorbell rang. I looked around at the mess, embarrassed, but there was no time to clean. When I opened the door, there stood Margaret, David's mother. Her presence was overwhelming, and she didn't even need to speak to take in the disarray. "Is this really how you're managing things?" Margaret's voice dripped with judgment as she stepped inside. I forced a smile. "Hi, Margaret. I'm just a bit overwhelmed." Margaret swept her critical gaze over the room, from the scattered toys to the cluttered kitchen. "Overwhelmed?" She raised an eyebrow. "It looks like you've completely given up." Her words stung, but I stayed calm. "I'm doing my best. It's just been a lot." She walked into the kitchen, eyeing the dishes with disdain. "This is unacceptable. How can you expect to handle anything else if you can't even keep the house clean?" I felt my face heat with humiliation. I was doing everything on my own, trying to manage, but it was clear that wasn't enough for her. The door creaked open, and David walked in. His face lit up at the sight of his mother. "Mom. What a surprise. I didn't know you were coming by." Margaret wasted no time. "David, look at this. Your wife can't even keep the house in order. This is how she's raising our granddaughter." David's smile faltered as he glanced around. His eyes landed on me, disappointment creeping into his expression. "Isabella, we need to talk. You can't keep letting things slip like this." A knot formed in my stomach. "I'm trying, David. It's just not easy." Margaret's voice cut through the air again. "Being a mother is more than just caring for a child. It's about discipline, responsibility. You can't let everything fall apart." David's gaze flickered between his mother and me, a mixture of confusion and frustration clouding his face. "Maybe we should help her understand the importance of this," he said slowly. Margaret's voice grew sharp. "Help her? No, David. She needs to learn what discipline means. She's not living up to the standards of this family." The tension was suffocating. David, who had always been my ally, now seemed to waver between loyalty to me and the weight of his mother's words. "Isabella," he said coldly, "you need to get your act together. This is not acceptable." Before I could respond, Margaret leaned in and whispered something to him. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the shift in his expression, a hardness settling in. "Maybe you're right," David said, his voice distant. "Maybe it's time for you to learn the hard way." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. In one swift motion, David yanked my hair, dragging me toward him, and landed a punch on my cheek. The world spun as I stumbled back, clutching my face in shock and pain. Tears streamed down my face as the reality of what had just happened set in. Lily, who had been silent until now, began to cry. The sound pierced through my haze of disbelief, amplifying my fear and helplessness. My phone was in my hand before I knew it, and I dialed 911, hoping for a lifeline. When the officer arrived, I felt a flicker of hope, but it quickly vanished when I saw his familiar face. He was a friend of David's. Calm and dismissive, he barely looked at me as he explained, "Without solid evidence, there's nothing I can do. I was stunned. But he hit me, I pleaded, desperation rising in my voice. The officer glanced at David, unfazed. Without proof, there's nothing we can act on. Maybe next time, try to gather more evidence before calling us. He left without another word, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. I looked at David, his cold indifference made my heart drop. Margaret, standing proudly by his side, wore a smug expression. It felt like betrayal on every level. As the door closed behind the officer, I collapsed to the floor, cradling Lily in my arms. The house, once supposed to be my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The physical pain was nothing compared to the betrayal I felt from both David and the officer. It was in that moment I realized I couldn't stay in this life any longer. I had to find a way out, for me and for Lily. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew I could no longer accept the life I was living. The journey would test me in ways I hadn't imagined, but it was a journey I had to take. The attack was only the beginning. I had never experienced anything like this. The shock of David's violence, both physical and emotional, left me rattled, but as the sting of the assault faded, a stronger feeling began to take hold, determination. I couldn't stay in this toxic environment any longer. I had to protect Lily, and I had to get out. The question was, how? A few days later, I found a flicker of hope. Rachel, an old friend from college, had always been a reliable support in my life. I hesitated at first, not wanting to burden her, but desperation drove me to reach out. "Rachel, it's Isabella," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help. Things have gotten bad. David hit me, the police didn't help, and I'm scared to stay here anymore." Rachel's response was immediate and filled with concern. "Isabella, I'm so sorry you're going through this. I'm an investigator now, I can help you. Let's meet and figure out what we can do." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop. I walked in, nervous, my heart racing, but seeing Rachel there, calm and composed, gave me a little comfort. I sat down across from her, grateful for her presence, but anxiety churned in my stomach. "So, what's the plan?" Rachel asked, her eyes focused and steady. I drew a deep breath, trying to find the words. "I need to leave David, but I can't do it without proof. I need evidence that what he's doing is abuse, and that Margaret is pulling the strings behind the scenes." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need to document everything. Do you have any messages, recordings, anything?" I shook my head, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "No, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Rachel's face softened with sympathy. "We'll start from scratch. We need to document your interactions with David and Margaret. If possible, try to record anything you can over the next few weeks, any abuse, any manipulation." Together, we worked tirelessly. Rachel showed me how to use a hidden recording app on my phone to capture conversations and incidents. I documented everything, phone calls, texts, and daily interactions with David and Margaret. I had to be careful. They were watching me closely, always ready to criticize, and I couldn't risk raising their suspicions. One afternoon, while David was at work, Margaret called me. I answered, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "Hello? Isabella." Margaret's voice oozed condescension. "David told me you've been causing problems. I've been patient, but clearly, you need to be reminded of your place." I recorded the entire conversation, her manipulative tone and the way she belittled me as a mother and wife. It was chilling to hear, but it was invaluable evidence. As the days passed, Rachel and I prepared for my eventual escape. We mapped out a plan for when David was at work, making sure I could leave without interference. Rachel helped me find a safe place to stay temporarily, somewhere Lily and I could be secure. One night, lying awake in bed, a mix of fear and determination gripped me. Leaving wasn't just about escaping David's abuse, it was about breaking free from the suffocating control Margaret had over our lives. I knew it would be dangerous, but it was a necessary step, one I had to take for Lily's sake. The day of our planned escape arrived, and my nerves were on edge. David was at work, and Rachel had agreed to help me pack and move. I spent the morning gathering a few essentials, trying to stay focused despite the knot of anxiety in my stomach. As I prepared to leave, I received a text from Rachel. "I'm outside, ready?" My heart raced as I grabbed Lily and our things. One last look at the house, at the mess, the clutter, each piece symbolizing the chaos and control that had ruled our lives. With a deep breath, I stepped outside, locking the door behind me. We loaded everything into Rachel's car, and the drive to her house was quiet but filled with a sense of relief. I knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. At Rachel's house, exhaustion hit me like a wave. We unpacked and settled in, and Rachel reassured me that this was only the first step. The journey ahead would be difficult, but at least it was a path to safety. Over the next few days, Rachel and I continued gathering evidence. We documented more instances of abuse, and Rachel helped me organize everything, ensuring it was clear and comprehensive. We knew the key to moving forward was solid proof. One of David's cousins, who had always been sympathetic to me, agreed to provide a written statement about her observations of David's violent behavior and Margaret's controlling influence in our marriage. With the evidence collected, we began preparing for the next phase, building a solid case. We categorized everything: instances of abuse, Margaret's manipulation, and David's erratic behavior. Rachel helped me compile everything into a detailed report, ensuring we had timestamps and context for every recording. Finally, we met with a lawyer who specialized in domestic abuse cases. She reviewed our evidence and offered invaluable guidance on how to proceed. "You've built a solid case," she said, going through the documents. "Now we'll work on filing a restraining order and pressing charges." Her words were a beacon of hope. We had the legal backing we needed. Rachel and I worked alongside her to finalize the paperwork and make sure all our evidence was ready. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. Rachel stayed by my side, offering support as we entered the courthouse. It was tense, and I could feel my nerves tightening, but I knew this was our chance. When it was time to present our case, I took a deep breath and walked to the stand. We played the recordings, presented the documents, and shared the statements from David's cousin and other witnesses. The courtroom was silent as the evidence unfolded, and I could see the judge's reaction as he listened carefully and reviewed the material. The hearing was nerve-wracking, but deep down, I knew this was the culmination of all our hard work. As it concluded, the judge's decision was pending, and Rachel and I sat in anxious silence, our hearts heavy with anticipation. It was a tense time, but I couldn't help but feel hopeful. The evidence we had gathered seemed strong enough to lead to a favorable outcome. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Then, at last, the call came. The judge had ruled in our favor. David and Margaret would face legal consequences for their actions. While the victory was significant, I knew it was just one step on a much longer road. There was still work to be done, but it felt like a fresh chapter was finally opening. Rachel and I quickly moved forward, focusing on securing my new apartment and finalizing our plans. The court ruling had provided me with a sense of relief, but I also knew this was merely the beginning of rebuilding my life. With Rachel's unwavering support and the legal system on our side, I felt a renewed sense of hope. It was time to take control of my future. Looking back on everything, I realized how transformative this experience had been. It tested my strength, my resilience, and my will to stand up for myself. Every small victory, every step forward, fueled my growing belief that I could overcome whatever challenges came my way. Though the court ruling was a major victory, there was still much left to do. The next step was holding David and Margaret accountable. We worked with our lawyer to ensure that all the evidence, recordings, texts, witness statements, was handed over to the authorities. Rachel's guidance was invaluable as we navigated the legal process. The day of the arrest arrived, and my emotions were a whirlwind of fear, hope, and anxiety. David and Margaret still had no idea what was coming, and I couldn't shake the nervousness about how they might react. Rachel stayed close by, offering reassurance and reminding me to stay focused. When the police arrived at their house in the afternoon, I stayed at a distance. Rachel had advised me to keep away for my own safety. I watched from a nearby location, my stomach twisted in knots as I waited. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, every minute an agonizing wait. Then, after what felt like hours, Rachel's phone rang. The news we'd been waiting for: David and Margaret had been arrested. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. It was the end of a long, painful journey, but in many ways, it felt like the beginning of something new. The people who had tormented me for so long were finally facing the consequences of their actions. As the sun set over Austin that evening, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't just the legal victory, it was the profound realization that I had taken back control of my life. With David and Margaret facing charges, I could finally start thinking about the future without their abuse hanging over me. In the days that followed, I focused on settling into my new apartment with Lily. The move was physically and emotionally draining, but it marked a new beginning. I put time and care into creating a peaceful, nurturing space for us, a sanctuary where we could heal and start fresh. Rachel continued to be a constant source of support. She helped me navigate the challenges of this new chapter and made sure I had access to the resources I needed. Her friendship was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. Though the legal process was still ongoing, with David and Margaret's court dates approaching, I felt empowered. I was ready to testify if needed, and I was determined to see the process through to ensure they were held accountable for their abusive behavior. The legal system had given me the tools to take control, and I wouldn't stop fighting for justice. When the day finally came that David and Margaret were officially charged, it was bittersweet. While I felt a deep sense of justice being served, there was also the realization that the scars they had left would never fully fade. But seeing them face the consequences of their actions was crucial. It meant they could no longer hurt anyone else. As I settled into my new life, I reflected on everything it had taken to reach this point. The support of friends, the legal victories, and my own strength had been vital in rebuilding my life. Now, I could focus on creating a loving and safe environment for Lily, free from the shadow of abuse. My journey had proven that resilience was more powerful than any obstacle. I knew I was capable of facing whatever came next, with strength, courage, and a deep sense of hope for the future.